Hey everybody, this is Perch, and I'm back with Mark Millar. Mark Millar. Actually, settle this once and for all. People argue with me all the time, and we talk about this. Is it Mark Millar, Mark Millar?
All my life it's been Millar, but the first time I went to America when I was in my 20s, people said Millar, and I was like, that sounds so cool, so I never corrected them. It just sounds so distinguished. It makes me sound so much more real than I actually am. Like, Mark Millar, I like it,
Yeah.
So I've never corrected anyone, but day to day, we all say Millar over here.
Good. Okay. Well, people should do. There's some gravitas to that name, though. Millar.
Read the lines, it's still a quality that I don't have.
Yeah. Well, thanks for chatting with me again. We talked. It's been more than a year now.
There's a couple of years.
I think at least. Yeah, you were gearing up to do the big crossover, but it hadn't come close to hitting yet. So
yeah,
it's been a while. And
it's funny. That's such a big pivotal thing for me, actually, because when you've written stuff for 20 years and then you say, now I'm going to cross them all over, and you're the only person to blame if it goes wrong. It's not as if you're part of a crisis event, where there's everybody's tying in with you and everything, And I was so pleased it worked out well, because wouldn't that have been embarrassing 20 years leading up to something that was kind of late? Yeah.
Yeah, no, it did. I think, and it had a lot of just really positive, solid critical acclaim too. People liked it. The reviews were really solid. It paid off. It felt like you. It didn't feel like a crossover. The problem with a lot of the crossovers and events is that it tends to lose the voice of the writer somewhere along the way. It becomes about something else. But it is felt like a story of yours and your universe, and it did really well. So congratulations on that. You nailed it.
Thanks very much. And the getting popular as, my God, I don't know how I managed to talk all these guys into leaving Marvel and DC, but like pretty much every time I think you just pay them enough money and they eventually say, okay, I'll do it, So they all left their Marvel and DC books, because I had such a great run of guys there. It's Jorge Jimenez doing Nemesis, Pepe Larraz doing Big Game, guys at Frank Quietly, Olivia Coipel, and everyone all working on Ambassadors. I really am spoiled. I'm incredibly spoiled, but I'm such a snob. I'm such a comic art snob that I can't work with somebody who's not amazing.
Yeah. It is. It's funny you mentioned that you've gone on. You've done some podcasts, by the way, and I'm sure everybody listening to this already knows it exists. But obviously, you have a podcast series of your own where you interview some pretty amazing people throughout comics. But you've gotten more involved in talking to retailers and trying to kind of sort out this whole comic business. And how has that been for you? Kind of stepping into that.
Kind of weird, because I've always lived really in my little bubble. I live in a different country. I sort of work slightly off to one side of the industry. I always kind of have, when I was at Marvel, I was doing the Ultimate books, and although they were the biggest books and everything, they were in their own little universe. It was just Brian and I, obviously Brian Hitch and I for Ultimates, but Brian Bendis and I were the only writers on them really for most of the time I was there. So we didn't really have to kind of cross over with anyone or really talk to anyone else. So I just always lived in this beautiful ignorant bliss. And then when I started Millarworld, it was just me and my pals. I would just bring in various friends and so on. So, and then I work in Hollywood now, and I'm just a huge comic book fan. But I think I was quite surprised. I got a little look at the industry, because I've always been slightly outside of it. And, last year I was like, hang on a minute, every time I go in the comic store, there's less books. Like the guys are trying to make a living selling toys and stuff. And this is not reflective of what I'm hearing online, where everything's supposed to be awesome, And then when I started talking about this stuff, it was crazy. It was like suddenly, all the attack dogs were sent out for you and everything. But somebody said to me, are you okay? And I was like, guys, this isn't the real world. This is like getting mobbed on Roblox. Like this, This is meaningless. So I was 100% okay. I was fine. But it was nice of people to check. But it did give me a little chilling glimpse into it. And I thought it must be pretty tough. I'm very lucky that I can exist outside of it all, but I think it looks pretty untidy, when you see what it's like day to day for a lot of people working in it. A lot of people are keeping quiet, they're scared of the mobs and everything. But I think it's all going away. I think one of the nice things about the industry shrinking is that I think all this stuff is disappearing rapidly. Like, nobody cares about all the nutcases anymore. Those voices are getting smaller and smaller.
Yeah, it's true. I think, you expose something that people knew, but they were almost stuck between a rock and a hard place, where comics were only sold in one location. You have the direct market. You have graphic novels other places, sure, but by and large, the monthlies and kind of that core part of the business was just in one location. And so whenever in any business you only have one location where stuff is coming out, it's dangerous. It basically, it's not just that it hurts competition. It means that if there's any concerns or problems or issues with that one, people get very nervous about saying anything because it's like they're attacking the place they're going. And then on the other end, there's just not a lot of money for creators, so they're looking to get anything they can in this business. You also don't want to complain in that world, and it's kind of a perfect storm of keeping a lot of these problems under wraps. And you blew the lid off that, I think, or at least you brought a bit of a spotlight to it, which was really nice.
Yeah, I think it was important because I think it's like being an alcoholic. The only way you can recover is to recognize a problem. And I think comics are a huge problem. I mean, they were tying it up in Dogman sales and manga sales and all this kind of thing. But, you could just see with your own eyes anytime you walked into a store or spoke to a retailer over a number of years, just things getting smaller and smaller. But I actually think there's been a little bit of a turning point as well. I see good things happening, which I'm really excited about too. I mean, there's great guys starting to appear. I love Jeremy Adams, who's great over at DC. I'm seeing what Robert Kirkman's doing with those G.I. Joe books and everything. Fantastic, genuine excitement from Transformers and, some cracking titles we would never have anticipated just dominating the top 10. And at Marvel, you can just see people trying again. I don't know. I just think last few months I've been more optimistic about comics than I'd say I have been for a couple of years. I'm heartened by what I'm seeing out there. People are really trying, which I think has always been the case. I mean, you look at comics history and you look at the 70s in particular, and there's kind of a decade of just relentless bad news. When I talk to guys who's generation before me, and they're like, every day we thought it was the end. Like Marvel Comics are eventually down to 15 pages of story and the rest is all ads. The books are all late. Nobody's showing up for work and everything. Everything's crazy. The DC implosion, the end of the newsstand. Comics seems to go through quite a lot of crises every alternate decade. And after the boom of the Hollywood years and everything, I guess this was just time for something like this.
It's natural. It also, I mean, on the good side of it, I think that you referenced, there's a lot of people who throughout any time when things are bad are putting in hard work. It's just they're getting buried kind of under a lot of other pieces of news. And we are seeing, I think in the last few months, I agree with you, you're seeing more of those voices get louder. You're seeing Kirkman, like you mentioned, with Skybound do what he does. People are getting the chance to shine again in comics, which is great. But it does take this happen. I mean, you mentioned the 70s, that the 90s had its own, people like the first half of the 90s. That second half was not as good around what was going on. So it is about every 20 years or so you get this hit. And I think we've talked about this before. I believe we were probably due for it around 2014, 2016 in that time frame. And I think Hollywood kind of artificially gave it a few more years. And COVID also created an interesting kind of different bubble. But now we're finally hitting what's probably overdue. But I'm optimistic about what comes out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Hollywood distracted a lot of writers. A lot of writers went to Hollywood, so you lost a lot of talent there, a lot of very commercial writers. And a lot of the artists got pretty wealthy as well. I mean, all the Millarworld artists got super rich, so like guys who were doing monthly books were like, I think I'll take the next couple of years off, that kind of thing, so it was another perfect storm, so like, but I think it's necessary, isn't it? I mean, you look back over the decades that comics have been around, you do notice one really powerful juggernaut decade, and then a decade where the industry is kind of struggling. But interestingly, the Ultimate line lifted Marvel last time when things were looking really bad towards the end of the 90s. That's when I broke in, and it was devastating. I mean, when I came in, all I saw was people losing their jobs and rumors of Marvel going into bankruptcy and rumors of checks bouncing and all this kind of thing. So that's kind of, comics was chaotic when I first came into it. And it's interesting seeing the Ultimate line at Marvel being great again, like the X-Men book, the Ultimates itself book, and Ultimate Spider-Man just seemed to kick off excitement again, like I haven't seen in years. So fingers crossed. One thing I love about comics is the people, I think, are endlessly kind of trying to think of ways to make it better. I think it's in the psyche of the comic book fan and the comic book creator. And all you need to do your job is a pen and a piece of paper. Like if you work in Hollywood, you need $50 million for a modestly budgeted picture, and you need a team of people around you, whereas you can literally sit with a pen and paper and create the next Superman if you're a comic book guy.
That's right.
And that's why it'll never go away.
Yeah, that's why I love it as well. And now we have some books. I wanted to talk about kind of what you're up to, but you actually mentioned one more thing. If I get hit on this, pull on this thread a little bit longer. Another thing that happens kind of regularly, if you go back and you look at the very late 80s, early 90s, and you look at some of the fights that were going on between John Byrne and Shooter and kind of different names during that period as well, there often is, in the height of when things are going really, really well, you have a lot of almost defensiveness inside comics where people who are kind of raising their hand and saying, I think problems are coming, get very aggressively shouted down. You saw this in kind of 92 to 94. There were plenty of people going, this is not healthy where we're headed. And you had very fierce reactions, like Comic Book News and some of the newsletters at the time, that version of social media. And it does replicate a lot of kind of what you referenced earlier, where there was almost a vicious kind of attack of people who were saying, hey, maybe things aren't all well here, 10 years ago. It does break through, but that has also been predictable through time. I've talked to old pros, they say in the early 70s, late 60s, again, similar kind of phenomenon. So these things have a way of repeating, it feels.
Well, I mean, even if you go back 100 years and you've got H.P. Lovecraft and all that, can you imagine H.P. Lovecraft had access to Twitter?
Yeah.
and I think
I'll do that actually.
Imagine, the guys in the 60s, the guys in the 80s, like those feuds, those famous feuds of the 1980s, in this Shooter John Byrne era and everything. It would have been insane, if this had been unfiltered, if the guys could actually argue with each other in public. So unfortunately, I think we're just in that period where every nutcase has got a voice now as well, but I don't know, people are also coming to terms with that a little bit, I think, now too. I think it's like an evolutionary thing. I think something like this just appears around about 2010, and then people have got defenses against it by the early 2020s. You're going to come across some of the most evil people you'll ever meet, but at the same time, there's a lot of really nice people out there as well, and you just block evil ones.
True. And the next generation seems pretty good. We talked to your daughter here, and she's got plans. So you're seeing some of the new faces come into it's pretty awesome.
I love it, and that's the thing. I mean, the new blood that comes in roughly every 20 years is always what lifts all the ships, So the Frank Millars and the Image guys of that generation before me, like the guys in the 80s and the early 90s, I mean, they created the boom that then influenced, my generation of guys coming through, just as they were influenced by, the Stan Lees and the Roy Thomases and so on in the 1960s. So every 20 years or so, there's usually just a new batch of people coming in, which is always exciting.
I love the optimism, and I do think these things break. But speaking of things kind of breaking and kind of moving forward, you had your big crossover event. It was well received, and now we're heading toward the next. Is this the? I'm not going to use Marvel language, but Phase 4 or whatever. What is this next chapter?
Yes, and I've lost count of what phase it is as well, but I just know this is the follow-up to Big Game, and it's a good jumping in point, so this is Nemesis is the first out of the gate, which is out on the 24th of July. Not sure when you guys are releasing this, but 24th of July, and it's essentially the follow-up to Big Game. Nemesis is smashed to pieces in Big Game. This is his big revenge story. It's the Count of Monte Cristo with Nemesis, so he's back, and there's a whole bunch of people. I kind of like the idea. What I love about doing something like Nemesis is it's the reverse of a superhero story, and the idea is that we normally have a superhero up against a rogues gallery of villains, so I kind of like the idea of a bad guy up against a rogues gallery of decent people who he's crossed over the years. So that's what this story's about too.
Yeah, that's excellent. And Nemesis has become one of your fan favorite characters. I think in Big Game was a major character. People have really drawn to that character.
It's funny, sometimes you do something that just connects, and it's funny because you're drawing on the same pads with the same pens and everything and designing these things, thinking about them, and something just hits. Like Hit Girl, I remember one night seeing two people in the street dressed as Hit Girl on the one Halloween, and it was just a little doodle, a little idea, but for some reason it resonated. And Nemesis, what was really weird about Nemesis is Steve McNiven and I only did 4 issues, and yet every time I went to a convention, people showed up with that book. I mean, it was like nothing. It was 4 issues long. And people made action figures of it, and people made little animated shorts they put online and everything. So for some reason, it's just every now and then you get lucky and one of these things connects with people.
I think the idea of Batman as a bastard, or just very clever. I think it also speaks to, and this is one thing I always liked about your work, and this isn't just me fluffing you, but I think you've maintained you maintain the ability to I should to have amazing villains. Your villains are villainous. They are evil. And in a lot of comics today, there's a especially from the big two, there seems like a desire to play the dark sides or the Doctor Dooms, and instead humanize them a little bit and have the evil be more kind of social unrest. That's the evil. But you have actual people who are villains who do terrible things, and I think there's a hunger for that.
Oh God,
yeah.
Your story's only as good as your villain, isn't it? I mean, the James Bond films you remember, or the Batman movies you remember, it's like
right.
Goldfinger and the Joker, isn't it? Like, it's not that exciting when Batman's up against the Riddler. It's like it's hard to get motivated to go to the cinema, and it's always been the same. I think one of the real strengths of Marvel, I think, has been its villains. It's always had really, really great villains. And I grew up at a time when the villains were really villainous. Like Alan Moore and Frank Miller were writing this stuff, so the villains were awesome. And those bits, I remember in school, I would take comics into school and show them to my pals, and the bits everybody pored over was Frank Miller's Joker or something, So I've always remembered, I've always thought when you're doing a story, you have to have a cool villain or you don't have a story.
Yeah. It's sad. I mean, it's amazing people have wandered away from that, but I think that's what a lot of people do see in Nemesis. They get a chance to actually get a character who's truly terrible, and we're going to see if that he can pull it off or not. But this is one book, and then you have an extra chapter, a new chapter to Prodigy as well.
Yes, yeah, we're doing the Prodigy movies. We're doing a trilogy of Prodigy movies at Netflix, and we've been developing. I started developing the book, so long ago, because it started, and it's a movie version, But this is the final chapter of that trilogy, which is really exciting, really good. The screenplay has been done for the film, and it's an absolute cracker. But I didn't want the screenwriter to kind of get too deep in without having the full story, because I wanted to really build that world, And I hate it when screenwriters have to kind of guess what's coming up. I quite like to have it all down on paper. So the idea is, for anyone who hasn't seen it, Prodigy is essentially Tony Stark meets Indiana Jones meets Sherlock Holmes. He's like the world's most brilliant man. And he's the guy you call in if there's a problem nobody else can deal with. So it means you've got that infinite scope. The stories can be about anything. And I've made them all quite pulpy. I like that lost civilizations, ancient astronauts kind of stuff and everything, And this is the book where I do all those things. But he was getting a little bit too snotty. If you're good at everything, it's quite hard to relate to. So I thought it'd be pretty cool to kind of expand him a little and do a Sherlock Holmes. And I gave him an older, smarter brother. And that immediately changes the whole dynamic of it for the third story. Nice. And I like the idea of also seeing what his dad was like. I guess that's the Indiana Jones thing, where I thought, I love all the secret space program conspiracies. I mean, I'm a big conspiracy guy, like most comic people. And I love that secret Mars program idea. So I like the idea that his dad was working on the secret Mars program and what's been going on in Mars, and he's been killed, and the two brothers have to investigate it. So there's a lot of fun stuff in this. I really like that. Yeah,
and you mentioned you're filming in Netflix. How far along is that series? Where are they with it?
Well, the first screenplay we didn't like, and we ended up after the strikes changing writers and bringing in somebody else. And they were very good writers, but they were just wrong for this project. It just didn't come together. And I think that's been my biggest surprise, to be backstage, to kind of be inside the studio, is to see how many incarnations scripts go through, things develop for years. And I'm so used to Matthew Vaughn, where you basically just go to the pub and he says, right, I've raised 80 million. I'm going to start shooting in 3 weeks' time, and it's so different at studios, where everybody's juggling millions of things, jobs are dependent on it and everything. It's much less maverick than it has been when I've been working with guys like Matthew. So it's very interesting, just seeing that sometimes it doesn't work out, and you have to go back to the drawing board and start over again and work with different writers and so on. But I think this is going to a really nice place. We know who the actor is. The actor's actually been attached for about a year. So we can't say, so he's committed for 3 films, but he's perfect for the role, which is super exciting. So he'll be a producer as well.
You're stealing the lead actor for Blade from Marvel. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, Blade's a perfect example of what the hell, my God, how many incarnations is that got? They should just go back to Wesley Snipes and do a proper
I agree. I don't know why. I mean, obviously, it'd be nice to have, I'm not trivializing it. You want a good movie, good plot, everything else. But, I mean, Blade shouldn't be this hard. It's Blade. Like, you throw some vampires in there, he kills them. It's okay. But actually, that's a perfect segue on this topic of vampires. All right, your third book. That's actually, really quick before I get there, Prodigy, this new series. When does that launch?
Prodigy is out in August. The two books that are launching in August are Prodigy and Nightclub 2, the sequel to Nightclub 1.
I'll put on that vampire bandwagon here.
Well, yeah, it's funny. Vampires never really die, don't they? It's so interesting. Like, I've always thought every 10 years the vampire thing just blows up again. And I thought, right, okay, I want to make it us this time, you know. And I've always liked the idea of doing a big vampire project because I hadn't done one. But also, I couldn't help notice that no one had ever done the most obvious thing you could do in comic books with vampires, was basically make them superheroes. Because they have all the superhero tropes, you know, they've got their strengths, their powers, they've got their weaknesses, the vulnerabilities and everything. And you just give them a social setup in this, you essentially get a Spider-Man comic, you know. Yeah. So, and plus, I remember as a kid, you know, these conversations you have with your friends on the way home from school. And I remember sort of saying, if I get bitten by a vampire, you know, I would never kill anyone. And my idea was I would just sneak into the hospitals and just drink blood, the hospital blood banks and everything. Because you're not going to just become a murderer, you know. So I like the idea, you know, people try to kind of make lemons out of lemonades when it comes to being bitten by a vampire and just being cool superheroes. And, you know, it's worked out really well. I really love this book. I've had a great time doing it.
Yeah, it looks great. And this was the book where, correct me if I'm wrong, where you tried the lower price point as well when this first hit.
We did. I mean, everybody said this is insane, and it kind of was insane because paper prices went up by 5 times. I think it was, you know. So I think you could print a comic for like 12 cents or something. And whenever we did it, I think the cost of paper went up to something nuts. It was like 60 cents or more per issue, you know, because it was after COVID and everything, you know. So it wasn't the ideal time to do it, but as a promotional thing, it was really fun. So the idea of a $1.99 comic, the last time I was in high school, the last time comics cost $1.99. So I loved the idea of doing that. If I had sense, what I'd have done is made it the first issue or something, but I did it with all 6, just because I like the grandiosity of it all, you know. But but yeah, we're just normal price.
Yeah. No, I mean it's tough to hit that, but I think it was nice. How the retailers respond, by the way, when you did this? Did they feel like there was something in it for them, or did they even notice? Like, and this is the one thing I'm curious as you talk to retailers. Yeah. And this is the experience I had as a retailer, is that you had, you know, you're looking at a catalog of say 400, 500 books a month, and it is that amount, and you just it's hard to manage. How was the response you got on that?
We did a little more than we did of the other books. You know, it moved the needle a little bit, but not enough that it's worth doing, you know. And I remember talking to some retailers about it and saying, you know, what do you guys think of the $1.99 thing? And every single one I spoke to said, I hadn't even noticed. And that was not, you know, because like you say, there's literally hundreds of books out there, and the price point on these things, it surprised me. They said the people who are going to buy it are going to buy it anyway, you know. So they said it didn't make much difference to them. I think we maybe got about a 30% bump, I would guess. If I had to put a number on it, I'd say about a 30% bump. But, you know, it's quite a drop in price, you know, to go down to $1.99. But, you know, I'm a great believer in trying every crazy experiment. Just give it a shot and just see what happens. Because it might be the way forward. Because, I mean, one thing I feel is $5 for a comic is just insane, isn't it? It just it feels...
It doesn't hold. I think that there has to be some other answer, but I think what's going to have to happen for that to take is almost every company is going to have to put out a couple comics at that price point, so it resonates with the retailer. Like, hey, there is this section of books that are coming in cheaper. You can market them differently. You can start to build that momentum and go from there. But it's a tough part of the business right now for sure.
But you know, I mean, like I say, people are trying new things, and that's what I love. I always say it's a bit like evolution, you know, where lots of things appear at once, and they're all trying something new, and one breaks through and becomes that thing that crawls onto the beach. You know, so that's what I think a new generation of people with a new head coming in is really exciting, because somebody's going to crack it. Like I say, who could have anticipated the Skybound stuff? Hats off to those guys for doing this stuff, you know. So, you know, next year it'll be something else. So it's exciting. It can be any creator at any time, which always makes it really exciting.
It is. And in the Skybound stuff, people have talked about that sometimes. Like, well, of course that was going to work. It was G.I. Joe and Transformers, and it's like, but G.I. Joe and Transformers, they haven't gone away. They've been in existence with IDW. But it hasn't landed. This was a different take, and it's it is working. So it just shows it's not just the property itself; it's kind of what you do with it.
Oh no, I mean, I was talking to a producer the other day, and we were talking about the Batman films, and he was saying, well, it's really easy for people to make money making Batman films, and I was like, well, not really, because in 1997 they made a really bad Batman film that nobody went to see with the exact same characters, the same worlds that Christopher Nolan had access to 7 years later, and he made a really brilliant Batman film. So your vision is more important than the character, I think, a lot of the time. So yeah, I think you never undervalue the people behind something.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's one of the issues that we see in comics a little bit is there is we'll just mine Batman 50 more times, and you see that going back to that bank. And if you don't have the creative talent behind it, it's I think it degrades the character, makes it harder. It just makes that mountain a little steeper. But yeah. These 3 books, they're all at Dark Horse.
Yes.
And how is that going? You've moved from Image to Dark Horse. How do you feel about that change?
I love it. Like the Dark Horse guys are awesome. Like, I mean, I've been friends with them for a long time, and we talked about doing stuff like, American Jesus, when it was originally called Chosen, came out in 2004 at Dark Horse. So I've had a relationship with Mike Richardson, sort of on and off over all that time. The Image guys are great. The Image guys are really great. I had a great 10 years there, but it just felt time for something new. And behind the scenes as well, just on practical levels, our company's owned by Netflix. Netflix already have a publishing agreement with Dark Horse. So from the really boring sort of accounts point of view, it's actually really super practical. That kind of thing's really easy when it's all in one place. But also just, it feels like a good fit for me. I don't know, like I like Dark Horse's books. They feel quite bespoke. I like the little sort of divisions that Dark Horse have got. I like the people who are there. And it feels like a natural home for my stuff. Like the Millarworld stuff will be finite. I don't plan to be doing this in 10 years' time or 20 years' time. Like the Millarworld story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, the whole thing. And I like the idea of them existing at Dark Horse as however many volumes, and they're there like Lord of the Rings or whatever for anybody in 100 years' time that ever wants to revisit them. And Dark Horse do awesome hardbacks. Like I love the library editions and everything, and we've never actually done any of that stuff before. So to get the Millarworld books all coming out in these beautiful oversized hardcovers starting this year with Wanted and Big Game, but also with Magic Order ambassadors and these things, it's a dream. I'm delighted.
Yeah. How far, out of curiosity, is it because your first the Kick-Ass book originally was coming out with Marvel?
Yeah.
Do you have the ability to pull that in to a collector edition, or does Marvel still have a say in that? Or how?
Oh, no, they're actually all over at Image now. I moved them all over to Image about maybe 7 or 8 years ago. So they've been at Image for 7 or 8 years. But we've only ever done paperbacks of them. We haven't over at Image. We haven't done any big special edition. But I think that's something I'm going to see how these library editions go, and then maybe do some Kick-Ass ones as well. Maybe some omnibus with all of them. Because I mean, you can see my shelves behind me. I love shelving. Like the one thing I get genuinely, there's 2 things I get excited about: stationery. I love going into a stationery shop and buying loads of cool new stationery, and I also love shelving. Like when we were buying a house last year, I remember every house we walked around, I didn't even look at the rooms. I was just looking at their shelf.
You got to have your priorities. I like it. So I think I read just somewhere, or you made a statement, these books, these 3 books that are coming out, there's a connection between the 3. Is that true?
There is. There always is. I mean, there's all the Millarworld books coexist.
Right.
So there's little references to each other and things, but nothing so overt. You have to buy them all. But like all my things, if you buy them all, you spot all the little Easter eggs and everything. And then, of course, there's 2 other books beyond that too. So in September, we have the big finale to Jupiter's Legacy, which is this vast 12-year epic that I've been putting together. It's everything I've really got to say in superheroes. Probably my last superhero story. And then, as well as that, there's Magic Order, which I think might be my favorite thing I've ever written. And this is my favorite volume of my favorite thing. Like Magic Order is a genre I've never really worked in before. Like horror's kind of where I started. I've never done that sort of dark magic kind of stuff. I've never really done that sort of thing, touching on fantasy. And I've loved it. I've just had such a great time doing it, and I've loved the response to it. It was the first book we did after we get bought by Netflix, and this is wrapping up that storyline. So this is volume 5. Matteo Buffagni, very slowly drawing it, but he is drawing it, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, and this is, you're wrapping up Jupiter's Legacy. Is this the final volume of Magic Order as well, or?
It is, yeah. So, I mean, I never like to stick around on things too long. Like 5 volumes is pretty much as much as you'll ever get from me. I mean, I usually only plan 2 or 3, if anything at all. My dream though is to get in and out. Like I like doing Old Man Logan, Red Sun, Civil War. I like to just do a 6, 7 issue thing and then bugger off.
Yeah. And so speaking of which, there's been, you've talked before about going to do some dream projects, other places, some things. Where are you with that? Or do you have anything in your mind around what you'd like to do that you could talk about?
It's funny, last year, I've had this itch for ages, for years, for a few years, to do one, sort of Marvel or DC project. I always thought I was done with it, but I've got notebooks in the house, filled with little, ideas. But I don't want to come back and do a run. I don't want to do more than one project. Like, I just feel that period in my life was my 30s. I worked at DC in my 20s, Marvel in my 30s. And I just think, I do other things now, But that little fanboy in you, there's maybe one last project you'd maybe quite like to do. And some of those ideas come half formed, some of them come fully formed. And I've just been thinking, I spoke to Netflix about it and I said, I'd like to take 3 months out and do something. And I'm not sure what it is. And I was on holiday with the family in Dubai last year and I was swimming in the sea. I was out in the middle of nowhere and my wife was on a boat with the children. And I was swimming and I had this idea for a Superman story. And I couldn't get it out of my head. And I remember I swam back to the boat and it took ages. I was miles away from it. And I remember the whole idea by the time I got on the boat, I was like, I've got this great Superman story. Have you got a pen? And my wife says, we're in the middle of the sea. Why would I have a pen and a piece of paper? So, and I was like, I need to remember this when I go back to the hotel. And I wrote it all down. And I had this perfectly formed Superman story. It was like a baby just being born. It was perfectly fully formed. And I really liked it. I mentioned it on Twitter just in passing, and I didn't really expect anything of it. But next day, Marie Jabins, who runs DC, she got in touch with me, and she said, "Look, if you're serious about doing a Superman story, we'd love you to do it." And I was like, "Well, I'm not sure what's going on. I'll need to get some kind of carve out to do it." And then that was last year, and I hadn't really thought about it again. But then the Marvel guys got in touch, and I'm still really friendly with the Marvel guys because a lot of the guys. Yeah, still there from when I was there. And they said to me, what the hell are you doing talking to DC? You can do something for us. And I was like, well, I've kind of done everything at Marvel, there's nothing left to do, DC is still a bit untapped territory for me, And they said, look, you can do anything you want, just think about it, And I couldn't think of anything. And then weirdly, quite recently, I had this idea. I haven't spoken to them about it yet, but I had this idea that would be the biggest comic book by far of the 21st century. It couldn't not be. I think I might have told you privately what it is, but I had this idea and it's completely impossible for it not to be enormous, And I was like, kind of tempting, because I wouldn't want to go back and do something smaller than Civil War or smaller than Old Man Logan. But this, just by its very nature, is so vast, it would be huge. And I haven't told Marvel, and I'm thinking about it, so I'm not sure. I mean, I'm busy doing other stuff just now, but if I do this, I'm going to do it in a month or two's time. I'm going to do it quite soon. But if I don't, I don't. But it's a good one, and that's where I am. And the Superman idea I can actually do in 9 years' time when Superman becomes public domain. So I might save that and do the Marvel thing. I don't know. I'm just going to see how it goes.
Yeah, there's plenty of options. Do you think first of all, very exciting, but also, do you think there's it has the appeal for working for the big two? Because if I go back in time to kind of 2010 or so, or a little bit earlier, like when you were doing Civil War, I talked to a lot of people coming up in comics and people working for the indies and putting else, I have my own story, I have my own indie project I want to do, whatever it happens to be, but I've got to do a run at the big two.
Yeah.
And it to work on those characters, to have my mark on Spider-Man or Batman or what have you. That noise has died down. You don't hear that nearly as much from. In fact, what I'm hearing is more kind of like what you did. People who have made it in indie comics and actually want to kind of come back and have an idea for a Superman story, like you said. Mm-hmm. But I'm seeing less and less kind of younger, newer talents who even want to do a stop there. What do you make of that?
I think that might be cyclical, though. I mean, I could be wrong, but what I suspect is going to happen, and it is in a few years' time, those creators who grew up on the Marvel movies are going to be Marvel obsessives. The way that Alan Moore and Frank Miller grew up on Stan Lee and Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby, and then they were Marvel obsessives in the 80s whenever they started working. I think we might have this. I think it might be a little early just now, but in a few years' time, that could be a real renaissance at Marvel in particular, because Marvel Maniacs were created in a way that we didn't even see in the Stan Lee era. Because, I mean, if $2.7 billion was raised from the Avengers movie, how many Marvel fans was that? And how many of them want to come and write those characters? So I think it's just cyclical. I think new people will come in to do these things. For me personally, like, when you love this stuff, it never really leaves you, like, you will in the middle of the night have a Green Lantern idea, something, you can't help it. But you just have to be tempted not to be tempted to go back, because I always think it's a mistake in life. You should always move forward.
Right.
And if you do go back, you do it sparingly. You go back the way Frank Miller has done. You go back and you do a special project or something. But it would just be the maddest thing for me in my early 50s, to go and become a guy working at Marvel and going to the summits and things like that. I mean, that's, you're going to look like a narc. I'm going to look like a narc sneaking into, like 21 Jump Street type of thing. It's a hello fellow kids situation.
The new writer of Miles Morales. There you go. So with all these things, you're still doing the work with Millarworld. You have the new relationship with Dark Horse. You mentioned, you've got some more years in it to go. You're tying up a couple big series, series of Divine New Magic Order, and Prodigy. I think you also said this is the last volume of Prodigy, last volume of Jupiter's Legacy. Nemesis, you haven't said that with. Is there more Nemesis you think after this?
It runs for a while longer, so like there's a lot more of that to come. We get the rights to Nemesis back from Warner Brothers this September, I think, so we get that back to Netflix, which we're really excited about, the film rights, so that's a real priority for us once that comes back up. Right.
And any of your other series that you think have more volumes that you're going to come back and tap to, or?
I'm definitely. I've already written a crossover between Space Bandits and Sharky, which ties up that thing. The 3 volumes of that. The Huck. There's more Huck coming next year, which I really love doing. I really enjoyed doing Huck. So the Huck sequel, I think, will be exciting. Rafa Albuquerque's back drawing it as well.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So I'm working with Stuart Eminem again. He and I are doing a project together. So a ton of books. But I think like that, the output that I'm doing is huge. I'm doing about 24 books a year or something on top of my day job. I think that will slow down. And I think I'll probably in time focus a little bit more on the non-comic stuff. But, right now I'm loving it. I'm having a ball. I've had 6 months off it. And, there's been nothing out since Big Game ended before Christmas. So having all these new books coming out just now, I'm loving it. It's really exciting. I'm loving doing the rounds as well. I mean, it's always great fun going around pimping all your books. It's something that's always cool. It's a fun part of the job.
Yeah. No, I and a lot of these, obviously, they're going to make their way to Netflix. You're going to build this. Is there a world, and I can't imagine it with everything you've said, but is there a world where you kind of tie a bow on your side of things and then it becomes somebody else's playground to play in? Do you see that?
That's the nightmare scenario. Yeah, I mean, that is the nightmare. Because I remember talking to Stan Lee about this, and I said to him, was it pretty cool seeing other people coming in and writing your characters and everything? And he went, no, I hate it. And I was like, what do you mean? And they said, I just wanted to write these things forever. I just wish there was enough hours in the day that I could have been writing Spider-Man for the next 30 years, And I get that, but the thing is, what's nice about Netflix is Netflix only indulge me with the comic side of things. They're not a publishing company. So whenever they bought my company, they own this forever, right? So, in 20 years' time, 30, 50 years' time, they could have other people doing these books, but they're actually not that interested in doing books anyway. It's just a fun thing for me, So their whole thing will be, we can go off and exploit this as TV shows, movies, games, cartoons, whatever. But, the actual publishing, I think, is just going to sit there like Lord of the Rings. I think it'll just be something that just exists on a shelf as a very finite bunch of stories with a beginning, middle, and end. And that's the way I wanted. That's what I told them I wanted.
The source, you're basically the source material, and then whatever happens after that happens after that.
And over the years, there'll be different people coming in doing different interpretations of them, I'm sure. But the publishing, I think, will always be quite canon. It'll always be that.
Now you've had, you've obviously, you mentioned it earlier, you've worked with a kind of murderer's row of amazing artists and creative talents. Anybody on your list that you haven't got to work with yet, or that you'd want to say?
I mean, there's guys who I just absolutely love, but they're quite hard to pin down for a monthly book. Adam Hughes. But then I didn't think I would get Travis Charest, and I got Travis Charest, So Adam Hughes, obviously the top of everyone's wish list. He's absolutely amazing. Even getting a cover out of Adam is amazing. Who else is great? I mean, I think I'll probably be doing a lot more sort of return visits to people, So like Theo Scalera and I are going to do something else again. John Romita Jr. and I are talking about doing a project together. A brand new project, something new. I love Valerio Giordano, the guy who's drawing Nemesis. I mean, have you seen the first 3 issues of
Nemesis? I have it. It's beautiful. No, it looks great.
Unbelievable, isn't it? I mean, that artwork has got such a great 1970s Marvel mag vibe. I always think it reminds me of John Bolton or something like that. It feels like a Conan book from the 70s or something. I really love his art. He's so great, and I feel really lucky to have him. So he and I are definitely post Nemesis. We're going to do something.
Yeah, it's you find artists who are not only skilled, but they create a mood for the book that fits whatever it is they're doing, and that seems to be a more kind of rare, combo that you see in a lot of books. You see artists go on. I mean, in some cases, really talented artists at the big two are on a project, but whatever mood they're creating, whether it's science fiction or it tends to be mismatched. It's you get a really good somebody who you could picture being a good kind of detective kind of storyline kind of artist on Green Arrow, and then doing a superhero book. So it's still good, but it doesn't quite fit. You've done a great job of matching those people together.
I think it's like casting a movie. Like somebody can be amazing, but they're completely wrong for the part. And it's the same with an artist. Like I think the sort of guy who's really good at drawing Superman is usually not that great at drawing Batman.
Yeah, I agree.
Vice versa, and it's I won't name names, right? But the realism that you have to do with Superman when you're drawing something so fantastical doesn't work with Batman. Batman looks like a guy in a suit. When you draw him realistically, Batman needs to be drawn by somebody who's a bit more expressive and cartoony. I think so. That's why the Frank Miller works well, Todd McFarlane works well, and so on. But you put Todd on Superman, and I think it would look a little weird. He's too cartoony for Superman. You need somebody in that Norman Rockwell kind of style, that realism. Alex Ross does an amazing Superman, Kurt Swan.
I agree. Todd McFarlane there is some Superman out there, and it always looked weird. I mean, he's a great artist, obviously, and amazing stuff together. And it's still Todd's style, but Todd on Batman or Todd on, a character like Spider-Man works. Todd on Captain America or Superman feels off somehow.
It feels wrong. And it's the same with the X-Men. I think X-Men has to be drawn by somebody who draws beauty. Like, I think mutation is such an ugly subject. Genetic mutation is essentially a horror. So I think it's a bit like a toilet tissue advert. A toilet tissue advert has to look pink and beautiful, and because it's doing something that's essentially not that pleasant looking, So so I think it's the same thing when you draw X-Men. When you draw X-Men, I think it needs to look like John Byrne or Jim Lee or Adam Hughes or something. Like if you have somebody too realistic or too cartoony, it looks grotesque. I think it doesn't work.
No, I agree. Do you think we've seen this pivot? Back in the 90s, you had a heavy emphasis on artists, and artists were what that at least were promoted to customers of the thing to care about. We then entered a world where the writers were promoted, and you were part of that era with Bendis and others. Now we're in this interesting state where it feels like the comic publishers, the big two, are still kind of holding on to that writer-centric stuff. But as you're talking about it, the people who are listening to this right now, you can hear the passion for art coming out of a very famous writer. And how do you think that balance breaks down?
I think it's just time for the big artists again. It's time for, sometimes it's nine panel pages and sometimes it's double page spreads, and I think we've moved from the 9 panel pages into the double page spreads. I think you want to see artists showing off what they can do, less talking heads, more spectacular, So I think for me personally, I mean, if you look at my shelves just now,
Yeah.
Like, nearly all the books that I've got are right now that I've been buying are actually comic art books. They're not even comic graphic novels or anything. If I see a new Frazetta book or something, I go and pick it up and gawp at the covers, So for me, comic artwork feels really important just now, and I love the number of these books that are coming out from independent press, that's looking at the lives of comic book artists, going all the way back to the 30s and 40s, guys like Lou Fine and all that, the fact that there's a big hardcover book about his work right now is incredible. So I don't know, I feel we're entering an art period right now.
Do you have a take of why why they pivoted so hard from very artist-centric marketing and everything else into writing? There was a deprioritization of art at the big two, or the artists behind it. Why do you think that was?
I think the stories were regarded as nonsensical in the late 90s, and probably that was the case for a lot of books. So the writer had become so devalued that people who were just working in the office were getting gigs, or people's friends were getting gigs. It was ridiculous, So writing was seen as so unimportant that the natural pivot against that was make the writing really important again. And it really worked. I mean, you look at when Joe Quesada and Jimmy Palmiotti teamed up with Kevin Smith and did Daredevil, even though Jimmy and Joe were the hottest art team in comics, I think, at 1998, 1999, the fact that Kevin was writing it was really exciting. We'd never seen anything like that before. It even eclipsed those guys in terms of the promotion. It was Hollywood coming to comics for the first time. And that just set the standard, I think, So then you had guys like J. Michael Straczynski coming in and so on. And it just became a very writer-driven thing. And because it worked, sales were going up and up and up and all these things, then they just continued to do more of what was working. But I think the artists did suffer a little bit from it. On the one hand, they liked doing comics that people were buying again and enjoying again. But on the other hand, I think sometimes they were a little bored with 10-page talking heads and things,
Oh, it's I've heard that many times. I don't know. It's you're standing at an interesting kind of turning point for comics, like you mentioned before, and I do think we're in that moment now. And you've got your empire here that you're putting books out. You have this connection. I mean, in an interesting way, you've got this natural, easy connection into a lot of these pieces. You have this connection into Hollywood. You have a vehicle to get your comics out. A lot of comic, indie writers or even Marvel and DC projects are struggling to find their way out. And it's very natural. You just got projects that are just, it's very seamed into your business. You're working with amazing artists you love. You're putting out books people are liking. You're very much in the, like you see with a lot of manga, you've got a number of different genres you're spinning simultaneously and kind of all under your umbrella. I'll ask you a question for all of us. So as the people listening to this, the up and coming creators, or the fans, the people buying stuff, what do you expect out of us? You put this together. So what do we need to do now?
In what sense?
See, it's a hard question. No, just we're consuming your books, we're reading your books, we're buying your books, we're looking at comics. We've talked a lot about how comics, the business, is going to evolve. How should comics, the fans and the customers, evolve? Where do you think the people who are reading, how should they start to look at comics?
It's a really interesting question, because I think there's been a disconnect, I think, between fandom and comics. And I just think it's an enthusiasm thing. Like American comics, I'd say for close to 10 years now, I've read less than at any point in my life, and it's not just an age thing, because I was 45 and I was still reading them, I was reading a lot of them. But across the board, just generally, if you look at every decade in comics, there's 10 standout storylines that you just absolutely love. And in the last 10 years, it's been a bit of a struggle to find that. If you were adapting one of the big two storylines in particular, into a movie, which one from the last 10 years would you take? It'd be a little bit of a struggle. But again, I think whenever the right product is put out there, people just get enthused about it. I mean, I've had friends saying to me, what we need is more comics news sites again. And I was like, you have to be producing comics that people want to write about. Right. Like you can't force comics journalists to write about comics they're not reading, So I think it's entirely down to all of us. Like there's got to be something super exciting that nobody's ever seen before and is completely unexpected to get people coming back into stores. And I don't think we're there yet. And I'm not blaming anyone in particular, because I think it's an industry-wide issue. I think it didn't help Marvel getting bought by Disney. I don't think that was a great move creatively. I think it made Marvel a little bit, I don't know, just careful. And I think the one thing that comics must never be is careful. I think like DC, it feels like a lot of people trying not to get fired as well. You know, everybody's just hanging on to their jobs. And I do think when times are tough, that's quite contagious as well. You know, where when we should be going more radical, it actually becomes more conservative. And I say conservative with a small c because Americans always completely misinterpret what I mean. What I mean is this old has nothing to do with politics, right? Because I know the comics are conservative. But like
I haven't noticed, yeah.
yeah. But there's a lack of boldness, you know, like the idea of like, you know, like Carrie Andrews did that Spider-Man book Ring, you know, where he has Spider-Man's deadly radioactive semen. You know? And the fact that people were like outraged by it and everything, you know, I see that as a positive. I think that's a good thing because Carrie did something nobody else dared do. And it might work, it might not work, these storylines, but that's what gave us Dark Knight. That's what gave us Ronin. That's what gave us Watchmen. And every comic book we ever loved growing up is somebody trying to do something we've never seen before. So I think Marvel and DC have to recapture that spirit. And the fans can never, ever be blamed. It's always the fault of the people who produce the books. And I include myself in that as well, you know. And it's the same with movies, you know, like the Star Wars people can't blame the fans if the fans don't like the stuff. You know, the Marvel people can't blame the fans. It's entirely down to the product itself. And there's nothing more honest, I think, than pop culture because if people are into something, they talk about it really enthusiastically. Like the fans really love this stuff and they want to like it, you know. So if you can just give them something good, that they're going to be so thankful. Think how people reacted when Lord of the Rings came out. I mean, think 20 plus years ago now. Think how excited everybody was, you know, and they were falling over themselves to throw rose petals at the feet of Peter Jackson, you know, and it was the same for Bryan Singer with X-Men and Sam Raimi with Spider-Man, you know. It's like the fans want to love this stuff, you know, just give them some good stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we've entered into this time and you see a lot of blame being thrown around. But I think the point you're making that I think is really powerful is and I agree. We need news sites. We need some of these things, but it's a second step. If there isn't something exciting to talk about, because you could argue we have lots of news sites out there. You have YouTube channels doing this stuff. The problem is they don't have anything too exciting to talk about. So what they're talking about is, in many cases, where things are going wrong. And so the companies are angry because they're talking about that. But the antidote is not to kind of bully them into submission. The antidote is put out a book that gets everybody talking, good or bad, and move that direction. I mean, I had this interesting debate with a writer, probably I shouldn't mention on the air, but there's this new Warriors book that Marvel was going to put out. And I don't know if you saw any of that.
It's hilarious.
Yeah, well, they never actually went to press with it. And it was, the characters were very much a product of, I'd say, internet culture 2015. Yeah. And it got mocked, and it got lots and lots of press on it, basically from the promo image alone. And I think you could make an argument that, kind of like Carrie Andrews and what he did with Rain, Marvel probably would have been smart to go out with that book anyway.
Yeah,
as controversial and goofy and whatever else it happened to be, that book probably would have generated a lot of mocking in the short term, but probably health in the long term, because it was somebody putting out something crazy. And that's what, to your point, I think that's what comics needs. They need that fearless, product in a weird way.
Well, think about the 80s. I mean, everybody's nostalgic for the time they grew up. But when I was a kid in the 80s, there was so many great titles that the fandom built itself around those great titles. So the reason that Comics Buyer's Guide and Comic Heroes, Amazing Heroes and all these things, and the Comics Journal covered the shelves every month when you're into the comic shop, is there was so much interesting stuff to talk about that one magazine couldn't possibly contain it, And I want to see us in that position again, where the material is so great that the YouTube channels can't talk about the negativity because there is none. They're really happy with what they're reading. And I know these guys. I mean, the most hated YouTube guys, I know them. I know everyone, so I've been in the business for a long time. And I know these guys just want to love the stuff. They're not doing this for hits, they're not doing this out of vindictiveness. They're just fans, and they want to, get their money's worth every month like the rest.
Yeah, there's big money in positivity if there's something to be positive about. It's all
absolutely, yeah. It's a race to the bottom, otherwise, isn't it? So So yeah, but I mean, and also you don't make that much money out of these YouTube channels, really. You know, unless I know you make a fortune from it. You make a fortune, but
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah.
but Mr. Beast is the only guy really making great cash. You know, so I mean, these guys are doing it out of the goodness of their heart. I mean, they love it. So I always think that they're going for the hits and all that is not true. They just want good stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's a good place to kind of wrap, I think, in a good on that positive note. Anything else you want people to pay attention to? You have these books coming out, hard press, starting about a week. And by the time this video comes out, I'll push it out pretty quickly. Get the stuff reserved to your comic shop. You have like comics coming out pretty regularly now for several months.
Yeah, I kind of like that. I like the idea of when you go to the store, you don't just pick up one book. There's maybe 3 books there, And I think by the autumn, there should be 5 in 1 month, which I love, And then I'll duck beneath the waves again. You won't see me for a little while. But like for these few months, I hope everybody enjoys it. I've had an absolutely brilliant time doing it. I mean, I love doing it. So hopefully that's contagious and people enjoy the books.
Well, they look really great. You've got a great art team, and the stories are amazing. So read through them, the issues you sent. They're great. So can't wait for other people to get their hands on it.
Oh, cool. Thanks very much. Thank you.
All right. Well, Mark, thank you very much. And hopefully we'll talk again soon.
I hope so. All the best then.
All the best. Take care.